Welcome to Stuff They Didn't Teach Me in Sunday School. The Bible gives us two different but complementary accounts of the birth of Christ. The Luke account is kind of quiet, beautiful, peaceful, sort of the Silent Night account. Matthew gives you like the Die Hard 2 account. It's got intrigue, it's got murder, it's got a villain, it's got people running, it's got all kinds of excitement in it. We're going to look at the second part of that, of Matthew's account of the Nativity in this episode of Stuff They Didn't Teach Me in Sunday School. It starts with, we're going to pick it up at chapter 2, verse 13. Now when they departed, behold, an angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream and said, "Rise, take the child and his mother and flee to Egypt." Get out of here, Joseph. You'll recall that Herod the Great, that borderline genius, insane guy, is out to get rid of this new king of the Jews. And God tells him to remain there until Herod's dead. Interesting line comes up in verse 15. Where Matthew, according to Matthew's sort of way he records things, he tends to go back to the Old Testament, pull the Old Testament passages in, and show you how they're filled full of meaning in the New Testament. And he quotes the prophet Hosea. He says, "This was to fulfill what the Lord had spoken by the prophet, 'Out of Egypt have I called my son.'" That passage that he's quoting is Hosea 11, verse 1. Interestingly, when you read it in context, it doesn't really look like it talks about Jesus, because the passage says, "Out of Egypt have I called my son. The more I called them, the more they went from me." And so the Hosea passage seems to be looking back at Israel and calling Israel my son. But Jesus is the new Israel. So he fulfills and fills full of meaning all that old Israel was. So Matthew could look back at Hosea passage and say, Hosea was talking about what old Israel was, but he's talking about what new Israel would be too. And just like old Israel ended up down in Egypt, new Israel will end up in Egypt as well. Then Herod when he saw that he had been tricked by the wise men, was in a furious rage. You did not like to get Herod in a furious rage. That was not a good thing. And we are told what he did. And what he did was horrendous. He ordered the murder of every baby, every male baby, under 2 years old in Bethlehem. That's been depicted in art, it's been depicted in movies at times, of this mass slaughter of hundreds of babies. But remember, Bethlehem was a town of only about 300 people, maybe even less than that. So the number of babies, if you do the math, the number of baby boys killed probably would have been about 10 to 12. Not a huge slaughter, but still a traumatic event for those mothers who saw Herod's men come in and kill their sons. Sometimes critics argue that this couldn't have happened because it's not recorded in secular history. But remember, we're dealing with a man who had killed two of his sons, his favorite wife, drowned the high priest in a swimming party, had done all kinds of horrible things. Not too shocking that the killing of a few babies in the little town of Bethlehem would not make the news. The story goes on. Herod dies, and in verse 19, an angel of the Lord appears in a dream to Joseph in Egypt, saying, "Rise, take the child, his mother, and go to the land of Israel, for those who sought the child's life are dead." He arose and took the child, his mother, and went to the land of Israel. When he heard that Archelaus reigned over Judea in place of his father Herod, he was afraid to go there, and being warned in a dream, he withdrew to the district of Galilee. This to me is one more argument that Joseph probably had a home in Bethlehem in the first place, that was his hometown. Because initially their inclination is to go back and settle in Judea in Bethlehem. And the only reason they go to Nazareth is because Herod's son reigns in Judea. Matthew closes the chapter by saying he went and dwelt in a city called Nazareth, and what was spoken by the prophets might be fulfilled. He shall be called a Nazarene. I should send you on a wild goose chase and have you go back to the Old Testament and find any prophecy in the Old Testament where it says he shall be called a Nazarene. You're not going to find that. probably what Matthew is doing is playing on the word nature. And when we don't translate the word, we miss his point. The word nature in Hebrew means branch. And there are many places, Isaiah 11 verse 1 being one of them, that look to Jesus as the branch off of the stump of Jesse, David's father. Intrigue, murder, a very clear villain. But in the midst of this, God has placed and protected his own son who would come for the salvation of the world. What a wonderful story.